Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another Poison Pen podcast. I am your science fiction and fantasy selector here at the Pen. One of the two Patricks here. And I'm very lucky to have one of my favorite writers, definitely outstanding writer, both in the horror thriller genre, science fiction, with his newest book, The Ninth Metal, which he is here for today. And for those of you comic book readers, he is written for Marvel and DC, and is well known for his X-Force, Wolverine, Nightwing, you name it. Ben has written it for these different groups. So we're really lucky. Ben, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks so much for having me on, and for everybody else for hanging out on a Friday evening. I've got my whiskey in hand, so cheers from afar.
Absolutely. I'll do it with a Diet Coke because you don't want to see me three sheets in the wind after a couple whiskeys there interviewing. I think the questioning might get a little entertaining there, Ben.
Or hostile. Well, let me know how
Exactly. You never know. You never know. It was kind of fun. A couple last summer, an author of our one of our authors, we actually ended up making drinks on camera, which was a blast. He from his house, me from the pen. So
love that.
try to make it fun and light. Yeah,
Hour.
cocktails that go with the books. Well, congratulations. I mean, this we've last time we saw you here physically in the store, it was for The Dark Net, which is probably one of my all-time favorite horror thrillers. I still recommend it to readers as a great introduction if they're too scared to maybe read The Exorcist, but still want enough horror to keep them awake at night. And since then, you've written a collection of short stories, you've written comics. I mean, what's been going on with your life?
I've been hunkering down. I pre-COVID was constantly on the road visiting comics conventions and sometimes bookstores and sometimes doing summits with Marvel and traveling to LA to pitch or whatever else. And it has been uh, great to have all this family time where I've been able to, spend more time around the house, just hanging out with the family, playing board games, reading stories, whatever, but also hammering that keyboard because that was a kind of antidote to the chaos going on in the world. Is I really smoked that keyboard and put out a lot of work. So I've been writing for Marvel, as you mentioned. I write Wolverine and X-Force. I also have a podcast that just launched called Old Man Star-Lord. It's about the Guardians of the Galaxy, and that stars
Nice.
Vanessa Williams and Danny Glover and Chris Elliott and Timothy Busfield. And then I've got, this comet cycle that I'm busy with in addition to a few Hollywood projects. So I'm juggling a lot of chainsaws right now.
That's exciting though, and you're one of those writers where I think you need to be doing a lot of different projects to keep yourself fresh, because you're always working on something different, and always working on something new, and you've always got your iron in the fire in a million different places, and yet you continue to put out a really high polished level of work. And I think that's really challenging. You hear some writers who, they get involved in a television series and you're not going to see them for 4 or 5 years.
I found that I don't get writer's block because I'm involved in so many different mediums, in that if I get stuck on a plot point or hung up on a character's motivation or whatever, I'm able
Mhm.
to divert my attention to a short story, a comic script, a movie script, whatever, and burrow myself into that for a while and then return to whatever I was stuck on before with, renewed enthusiasm and a fresh perspective.
Sometimes it just takes a little bit of time for your mind to ruminate over the problem, right, that you're facing with whatever you're writing, and just be able to kind of to come back refreshed. I know I do that a lot. I work as a, oddly enough, as my day job. I work in coding for a hospital, on a program in EMR for a local hospital, and I find that if I'm working on multiple projects at the same time, it's great for the brain because when you get stuck on the logic not making sense in the background of the system, you can go off and do something else, and while you're waiting for that, you come back and you do the problem gets solved while you're
Absolutely.
working on.
It's not just that, it's that the different mediums that I work in tend to bleed into each other, one, but also I learn new techniques. I learn different storytelling arsenal from, say, writing for audio as opposed to writing for comics, as opposed to writing for novels. All of these, different storytelling mediums have different requirements for
Right.
engaging an audience. And I think that ultimately, I'm a better novelist because I've been writing comics. And because I've been writing comics too, in a way, I have that to thank for the Ninth Metal and the Comet Cycle.
Absolutely. One of the great things about I think writing for comics is the fact that it requires a certain level of snappiness. You have to have a level of brevity associated with it, and you have to tell a full story, but quickly get to the point because you only have what 24, 25 pages
Yeah,
of story arc to write.
a comic has 20 pages, generally speaking, not 18, not 24 unless you're writing for Image. 20 pages, 5 to 7 scenes, and there's an A plot, a B plot, a C plot, and a D plot. And the B plot of one issue becomes the A plot of the next, and the C plot becomes the B plot, and so on. There's a tight story math at work. And as a result of that, I really connect to what Terrence Hayes, the poet, has to say about the difference between free verse poetry and form poetry, such as a villanelle or a sonnet. He says it's cool if you can break dance, but it's badass if you can break dance in a straitjacket. Writing for comics is like breakdancing in a straitjacket. It has constraints, but sometimes those constraints can be inspiring.
Absolutely. Do you have a favorite character that you enjoy getting into the head of?
Well, I'm writing Wolverine right now, and though it sounds a little cheesy to say, it's a childhood dream come true. My formative reading experience is comics. I don't know
Right.
what the first novel is that I ever read. I remember reading The Hobbit in fourth grade, but I'm sure there were books that came before that. I do, however, remember every comic that I ever read, and that's because I kept them. And I would read them over and over and over again until they fell apart in my hands. And my mom, when we were growing up, the first town that we lived in, we moved around quite a bit, but the first town that we lived in, Crow, Oregon, just outside of Eugene, was so small that it didn't have a grocery store. It had a mercantile. And she would set me at the end of the aisle, and it would be these, these wide board plank floors and lacquered fish on the wall and antlers mounted. And she would set me at the end of the aisle where the spinner rack was. And you don't see spinner racks anymore, but they used to be in every grocery store and gas station, right? Spinner rack comics. And I would pull down issues of Man-Thing and Warlord and the X-Men and the Fantastic Four and Spider-Man and Thor. And I would read these and obsess over them. And I never wanted the candy at the register. I just wanted the cape and spandex comics. And so, that's sort of like my foundational reading experience. It had a, just tremendous effect on my imaginative hardwiring. And Wolverine is the character who I always gravitated towards most. And as a guy who is now, a hairy, grumpy, muscly, smelly guy who lives in the woods,
Right.
chomps on cigars, and favors his meat cooked raw, cooked rare. You could say that me writing Wolverine is a form of thinly veiled autobiography.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I remember, and you and I are actually not too far different in age. And I remember probably fourth or fifth grade, my friend got me into reading comic books. And by the time I was done, I'd sixth or seventh grade, I remember getting chicken pox. And my dad came home with a stack of comics about yay high from the local comic book shop. And I think that's what I did for the 2 weeks of recovery time I had with it. And my favorites were always the X-Men. The X-Men were always hands down one of my all-time favorite series. I still think that they're great. I think that they teach valuable lessons to the younger readers, and I think that they continue to inspire and continue to tell great stories for those of us who are in their 40s and still guiltily read pretty faithfully these stories. So kudos to you for doing that, because I think it would be a hard thing to do. and to keep them fresh, keep the stories fresh.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing about writing comics. Here you have characters who sometimes have an 80-year legacy, right? How do
Right.
you fresh? How do you put a unique stamp on it? The last thing you want to do as a comics creator is to do karaoke, is to be in the cover band, right?
Yeah.
You don't want to simply ape what others have done before you. Instead, I tend to do a deep dive before taking on a comic series and reread everything I can possibly get my paws on. And in doing so, I then create a sort of breakdown. And I learned this when I was working for DC. Jeff Johns and I, at the DC mothership in Burbank, there was this office that had a boardroom office that had windows on one side looking out into Burbank, and the other wall was floor to ceiling, a whiteboard. And we were breaking Green Arrow in there, which I wrote for several years for DC. And what we did was we broke down the greatest characters who had ever appeared, sidekicks, romantic interests. What are the fundamental tenets of the character? What are some of the ways in which the story had gone off the rails at times? What were ways in which we could make it matter uniquely to this moment right now, and so on and so forth. And we spent a good 8 hours just generating this brainstorm session before I ever even sat down and honed my pitch. And the same, I'm always thinking about that, if you look at what Scott Snyder did with Batman, for instance,
Yes.
his is all about Gotham, really. He makes Gotham the central character of his story, right? So that's the way that Snyder and Capullo put their own unique stamp on Batman. With Wolverine, right, we've got this new era of X-Men, this new dawn, or now it's called the reign of X-Men. And, for the first time, the mutants have united. They belong to this nation of Krakoa. They're isolated on this island, while at the same time having access to the rest of this world because of Krakoa's different properties. Krakoa can plant, it's an organic environment. It can plant a seed like in Antarctica or on Mars. And the corresponding seed, right, creates a gate through which you can travel just in an instant anywhere. They also offer up these medicines to the world that can cure cancer, that can cure Alzheimer's. And all nations can have access to that medicine so long as they sign a treaty that acknowledges Krakoa's sovereignty. They've sort of taken a step up to the world, a world that's always marginalized them, a world that's always treated them as other, and they've said that's enough. And the unique take is that, but also with Wolverine, like for the first time, he has a flag he can sort of salute to. He has, 40 acres he can call his own. He has family, not just in Xavier and Jean and Scott, but also in the Wolverine family, who are all on the island. And he has, no other word for it, a shot at happiness.
Absolutely. I thought it was a really clever idea as well, because you were able to bring back characters that had, through storylines and story arcs had disappeared, either through death or through something else. You were able to bring back some of those characters, like Moira McTaggart came back for a big portion of the story arc, which I thought was really intriguing.
You haven't seen the last
So talking about that, I mean, you've worked for Marvel. Did you work with Marvel before it was bought by Disney, or have you always worked with them since?
Just a little bit after. I started off writing the podcast for them. So Wolverine the Long Night, Wolverine the Lost Trail, you can download them wherever podcasts are available for free. And that was my first gig with them, which led to the comics.
Nice. I mean, it's incredible. And because Disney now owns this large franchise, of course, they're going to be keeping these characters around outside of the public domain for a very long time. But the great thing is that we get to continue to read them and we get to continue to enjoy them, which is amazing. So moving a little bit away from comic books, I'd like to talk about you as a novelist. You've written a couple of my all-time favorite books, Red Moon, which was amazing. I also absolutely love The Dark Net. I thought that was an incredible thriller / horror novel. And now you've given us a really great science fiction book, The Ninth Metal. And I apologize if it's backwards on the camera there, but it is an incredible story, and it takes place probably not too far from where you are. You're writing a little bit about your region of the United States. Can you give us a little bit of a pitch about the book?
Yeah, and first, let me reverse gears just a second in it and build a bridge between what our comics discussion and this, because I was inspired by the Marvel and DC universe. I'm trying to create my own shared universe. You know, if you read comics, you know that one of the pleasures of that medium is that what happens in Wonder Woman spills over into Superman, spills over into Batman. There's a ripple effect, right? And so
Absolutely.
I am building a shared universe in these 3 books, but they're not just 3 books. It's called the Comet Cycle. And I did that for a reason, because this could be 6 books, it could be 9, it could be 12. It's supposed to be infinitely generative. And in these first 3 books, you have them taking place at the exact same moment. And the moment is soon after there's this meteor shower, right? This world altering meteor shower. So the idea behind all of this, the trigger event, is an age old sci-fi concept. A comet comes streaking through the solar system. We spin through the debris field. Meteors rain down, and they introduce new elements to the world that change the laws of geology, biology, physics. They upend the geopolitical theater, and they create, this sounds a little marvelly to say, a new dawn of heroes and villains.
Mm-hmm.
And what I wanted to do was create a new world within this world. You know, this is a grounded reality. This is you know, the Minnesota that you know. In the first book, it's the Seattle that you know. In the second book, it's the Alaska that you know. In the third book, they all take place in different regions. And what I'm doing is just putting a crack through the center of it. It's a broken mirror held up to reality. And in northern Minnesota, what's happened is that omnimetal has struck. And again, different parts of the world, there's been different meteor showers. Omnimetal is unique to northern Minnesota. At least that's what people believe at first. There might be some other strikes out there in the ocean, in the Gobi Desert, and so on. But I chose northern Minnesota as the stage for this for a few different reasons. One, I have lived here in Minnesota for about 10 years. And I felt this is my first book that takes place in the northern Midwest. I felt like it was the first time I could adequately represent it. You know, the worst thing you can do is give the tourist perspective. And I felt like it took this long to understand sort of the geography, the politics, the culture, the vernacular, the myths of the place. And northern Minnesota is especially interesting, not just because it's gorgeous and I like to get there as often as I can, but the Boundary Waters area, the Arrowhead region, the North Shore, it's a liminal space. And what I mean by that is, right, what's Canada, what's the US, what's private, what's tribal? There are a lot of questions about that sort of thing. So if it's a story about different worlds bleeding into this world, it seemed like the perfect backdrop for that. But also, northern Minnesota is interesting because it used to be the center of the world for steel. The Iron Range of Minnesota is where a lot of iron ore, a lot of taconite was just shipped off to steel mills throughout the world. And like so many parts of the Midwest, you know, there's been sort of a Rust Belt deterioration in that there's still taconite produced, but not at the levels as before, same levels as before. So it's in a state of economic decline. And there's a lot of debate about whether it's more important to protect these wilderness areas or to, you know, serve economic prosperity to the people who live there. It's an ongoing debate. It can get really heated, especially when they discuss copper nickel mines potentially opening in the Boundary Waters. So I thought, what if this would be the place, right, where the omnimetal struck, and you have these legacy families who are trying to, you know, legacy mining families who are trying to reestablish control, where you have people who are becoming overnight millionaires, where you have people rushing from all over the world, Saudis coming there, Chinese coming there, Indians coming there, roughnecks streaming up there, people, the equivalent of oil roughnecks, miners streaming up there, a rise in prostitution, a rise in crime, a rise in drugs, so that we have a, nouveau Deadwood, a contemporary Wild West in the middle of nowhere becomes the center of everything.
North Dakota was like that a few years ago, when they were doing I think it was a big oil boom, right?
Right, the Bakken oil formation. And I spent a lot of time reading up on that, studying that, and then transposing it upon northern Minnesota.
Yeah, I mean, I heard that I had family that was up there at the time, and they were talking about just how outrageous certain prices were. I mean, their hotels, could just sort of name their price, and they
All
would,
were full. They
yeah,
ended up building what they called man camps, these giant camps that they just, erected overnight, sometimes with 11 people, 12 people in a trailer. To be able to fit them in. And the motto of North Dakota for a while, maybe it still is, was a millionaire a day, because so many
yeah.
people are paying off their mineral rights.
Yeah, and it really does. And when you talk about the Rust Belt, I mean, in some ways, it's really a shame because we're talking about a big center of our country that's essentially neglected. And you focus a lot on that, the feelings of the people and what they're dealing with dealing with sort of this economic depression and this decline of what used to be so good, right?
Yeah, and I think that one of the things in writing about this is this stuff can get really political and really heated, and I didn't want it to be didactic in any way
No.
or lecture in any way. What I was looking to do is raise questions instead of answer them. So I've got perspectives on all sides of the issue. Everybody in this story has a different perspective on what's best for the town of North Fall, Minnesota.
Absolutely. And but I do think that it's really intriguing the way that you bring up all of these questions and you allow the reader to decide. And one of the things that I really love about science fiction is we can go in and we can kind of dissect a particular human problem, right? And then we can take a look at it at so many different angles. And I feel like once we're done reading that book, we're better off because in a way we've been taught something new without being lectured to. And for those books that really intrigue us, we get to delve in a little bit deeper on our own research.
Absolutely. I mean, this is a standard of the genre, and you can go
Mhm.
back in time to Frankenstein and look at the way that it's born out of the Industrial Revolution and the fear of science and technology, the fear of man playing God. You can look at Invasion of the Body Snatchers and understand that it's born out of the Red Scare. You can understand that Godzilla is about post-atomic anxieties, or the way the Living Dead movies, reinvent themselves in every era in which they're produced to reflect a different cultural moment. And this is what Star Trek does, episodes of Star Trek does. This is what Margaret Atwood does in all of her work, and
Mhm.
Octavia Butler does in all of her work, and it's sort of a tenet of science fiction in general is to take the naughty KNOTTY naughty issues and try to untangle them through a speculative lens.
Absolutely. But at the same time, make it engaging enough to keep the reader kind of going through. I do have a little bit of a penchant for science fiction that sometimes um, that tends to lecture a little bit, and I enjoy that. I enjoy like one of my all-time favorite books is Aurora by Kim Stanley Robinson, and he'll go on to pages about math and science, and I enjoy that. I sort of eat it up, but at the same time, it can really drag down a book. That is a horrible idea for pacing. It's a horrible idea for storytelling. And what I appreciate with the Ninth Metal is the fact that you're giving us a lot of great information, but you're not slowing down the pacing of the book to keep us engaged as readers.
Well, that's something, thank you. And it's something that I'm thinking about constantly is how do you dole out exposition? Because if you are introducing new laws to the world, they have to be explained. And if you look at a book of mine like Red Moon, right, I'm introducing to the world this notion that there's a contagion moving among us, that it's based on prions, misfolded proteins, such as you find in chronic wasting disease and mad cow disease. But it's a version of what it means to be a werewolf, right? It jumps out of the wolf population. It infects about 2% of the population. In that book, I sat down with researchers from the USDA labs and Iowa State University, and I created all these different laws too that the government had in controlling the people who were infected and drugs used on them and blah, 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 blah. But you can't just crush that into a novel or it gums up the gears of narrative. You have to instead sprinkle the breadcrumbs. And there's something similar going on in the Ninth Metal, where there's these discoveries that are made, and there's discoveries not just that scientists are making, but that the audience is making. They're doled out, but and it's not just about gumming up the gears, it's about suspense, right? Suspense is all about withholding information. And so it isn't until sort of the end of the novel that a lot of the more extra normal truths of Omnimetal are revealed when it comes to, its possible, not just cosmic origins, but the way that it might offer up a glimpse at the multiverse.
Yeah, absolutely. And what is so special about this Ninth Metal? Can you give us a little bit of a hint?
Well, Omnimetal, there are 8 noble metals, noble and rare metals such as gold and silver. So Omnimetal is the 9th metal. And I sat down with one of my giant nerdy friends who works at Carleton. He's a physics professor, and I plied him with scotch, and I demanded he tell me all the secrets of his trade. And filled up notebook after notebook, and a lot of what he was telling me was, no, that's not actually possible. And I'd always be like, but what if it was? And we'd go from there, and so that's where I sort of built the science behind this, which is that Omnimetal is able to absorb kinetic energy on a quantum level, so that if you shot it with a bullet, right, it would absorb that energy and it could store it and propel it later. And so you can create sort of self-propelled mechanisms with this. If you put it in a car battery, just the movement alone of the car charges the vehicle. Or there's an Omnimetal train track, that I have in the opening section, because I'm tipping my hat to the Western there. The train stapled across the plains going to this, boom town. But it upends, as I said, the energy sector, but also the weapons sector. So you have these government labs that are set up where experiments are being run. And they're trying to find a way to get a leg up on the rest of the world. But it also seems to, there's a religious cult that sets up on the edge of town, and they are smoking some of the, the shavings from the metal, salts that come off the metal, and they have a telltale glow to their eyes that is homage to Dune and Spice, of course. But they seem to be able to speak to something else, to connect with something.
That is really cool, Ben. That really an interesting concept. And I could see, if something like that happened to land, we would probably see these different factions sort of coming through, and you would definitely get that religious bent, and you would definitely get the the Defense Department and everybody else coming on in to try to weaponize and get a leg up in terms of making this new metal. I find it kind of intriguing. The last few weeks, it seems like along in the news, they're talking a lot about UFOs, right? And they interviewed Obama, and he was talking about, the fact that he wanted to know more about unidentified flying objects. And I think it's interesting. There's almost sort of this resurgence and kind of that science fiction paranormal interest going along. And I don't know if it's because we've all been cooped up in our houses a little bit too long thinking about what's outside or what.
Yeah, I mean, I recently wrote a LitHub essay about sort of that very thing, and that, I don't know if it's a combination of age or the pandemic or just the chaos of the past few years, or I also kind of pinpointed it on the information glut that we're living through right now, I feel like I know too much. I feel like I can get online within minutes of something happening in Rio, in London, in Chicago, wherever. And I can know everything I want to know about it. I can watch surveillance video, body cam footage, cell phone footage. I can hear from firsthand witnesses. I can hear from so-called experts hashing it out. And just that constant flood of information, it burned me out. I was feeling like I was kind of a little bit numb and nerve shredded. And that I know this sounds a bit hyperbolic, but that I'd lost my capacity for awe. And one of the things I did just in my life to fight against that is I'm sick of watching the news. I'm sick, everybody yelling at each other. I'm sick of reading breaking news online. I only read print news now, just as a way of letting it be a little more solid and marinated. But I also, with my work, I just felt like I wanted to tap into something again that made me feel wonder. And I decided it had something to do with the unknown.
Yeah.
I wanted the unknown. And so in the unknown, you find wonder, you find awe, you find the sublime. And so in crafting this book, which introduces all of these things off the periodic table to our world, you align yourselves with characters who don't fully understand what's happening. And it created in me, and I hope that this is carried over to the reader as well, a sense of energy and mystery that made me feel like I was plugging into something electrical.
It's exciting when you're when that happens in this book. Definitely, I can feel your enthusiasm and your enjoyment. Clearly, you enjoyed writing this book.
Yeah,
because it comes across on the page.
On that note, though, that I think that everybody sort of feels the same way. They want to look elsewhere right now.
Yeah.
After being cooped up so long, as you put it, after just a nerve shredder of a year, you look up to the sky.
Mm-hmm.
Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos are already there.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, it's an exciting time, and I think that one of the most exciting things is that I think that a lot of us are interested in what's out there and what's out in space. If we went to Mars, what would we be able to do? I mean, we talk about the fact that, you've got this omnimetal, but right now we're shredding our world for these rare earth metals so that we can power our cell phones and our cameras and all of our technology and our computers and everything. And what would happen if we're now introduced to something that really can change our world, the way that we're looking at it, but we only have a finite amount of this resource. And I think that it's a great allegory of what we're currently doing with our own planet and what will happen when we start to run low. We have to look elsewhere. We can't continue shredding apart our own planet for these resources.
I was talking about writing more and more and more of these books in this cycle, in this world, in this shared universe. And one of the ones that I have in mind is an asteroid heist.
Oh yeah. That would be a great one, you could have a group of Canadians be the ones heisting the asteroid, and it would be the politest asteroid heist in history. Don't take my ideas, they're terrible. But one of the great things about the ninth metal too is you're keeping the reader, and one of the things I really like about it is that you've got the first 3 books written, and you're going to keep us,
the last one, but
yeah, one right after the other, after the other, after the other. So when we're done with the ninth metal, 3 or 4 months later, we've got your follow-up to it, don't we?
Right. Yeah, let me tell you a little bit about that, because it was sort of a unique pitch in that I not only went to Houghton Mifflin with the idea for the books, I went to Houghton Mifflin with the idea for the rollout. And I was taking a cue from comics. if you think about the way that literary land works, right? A novel comes out, and typically it's a hardcover that's between $27 and $36. Now, if I, as a nerd who reads a lot and is inside the industry, sometimes hesitate to buy that hardcover, how do other people feel? And so if you look at comics, by contrast, they come out first as $2.99 floppies. They later on, after 5 of them are out, are collected into a trade paperback, about $10, $15. They later on are collected into a hardcover edition. Maybe the hardcover edition has extra material. Later on, they're probably collected into a hardcover omnibus edition, right? So the collector's item comes later. If I see a movie and drop $7 on it or whatever, and I love it, I'm later on going to buy that $36 Blu-ray director's cut with all the scenes in it. And I feel like, maybe you disagree with me, you know best, working, with the Poison Pen. It seems to me that there needs to be a kind of reversal. I wanted to shake up publishing a little bit in trying to create cheap, wide distribution, because these books come out as paperbacks. They come out as paperbacks in quick succession. In 6 months, in January, The Unfamiliar Garden comes out. In June of next year, Skyvault, the 3rd book in the series, comes out. They come out as paperbacks for $9, whatever. And then later on, there'll be a deluxe omnibus hardcover edition that'll have illustrations and short stories and an author's note and such. And hopefully the super fans will pick that up as well.
It's funny because a lot of readers who come here to the Poison Pen come here specifically for the hardcover books, the collector's editions. I mean, you are so kind. I'm going to show the one that got a little bent up in the mail. Most of them are in perfect condition. You've signed them for us, which is great. But
there are hardcovers available, I should say. There are library editions, but people are buying them up. But the paperbacks are available right now as well, and that was
absolutely
meant, be encouraging, not exclusionary.
Exactly. So we have something special here where it's a signed hardcover, and we have a lot of people who specifically come for the hardcovers. And it's funny because people talked about the death knell of the independent and the regular bookstores because of digital books. And I think digital books are really wonderful. I mean, for people who are have vision problems, for instance, you can instantly go from regular print to large print without spending a ridiculous $40 on a specially printed book, that is done by a specialty press. I mean, there's some really wonderful things about it, but I find that so many of our customers will read some digital books, but most prefer paper, whether it's hardcover or trade paperback or mass market. They really love the experience of reading off paper because we read differently off of paper than when we read off of electronics. And those authors who are doing or have done something similar to what you've done, what I really like is it keeps the reader engaged with your series. Because when you write one book and then it takes a year and a half for the next book to come out, or a year, you've sort of lost that steam, that interest. And so I just think it keeps people really engaged, and they have something to look forward to, because I'm sure you've gotten it after you've written books. Well, what's the next one? Because we've enjoyed what you've written. And it's so satisfying as a reader to say, oh, you enjoyed The Ninth Metal. Well, the next one's going to be out in a few months. And then you don't have to wait long, and the next one will be out there. And it's kept the person engaged with your series. And that's what I really like. I think it's a smart way to publish. And I wish publishers did it more often.
There's more timber coming down the trail.
Yeah. So you've mentioned you've been writing these books. Can you mention any of the Hollywood projects that you're working on as well?
Sure. Yeah. One is that Sony has hired me to adapt The Ninth Metal into a pilot. So I'll be working on that over the next few months. I'm also adapting Urban Cowboy, if you're familiar with the 1980 movie with John Travolta. I'm
Yeah.
adapting that with my buddy James Ponsoldt, the director, into a series for Paramount. I can't tell you about this video game that I just adapted into an animated series because I signed 10,000 non-disclosure agreements, but that's another project. And then supposedly I have a movie shooting in July. Fingers crossed.
Nice.
Director just
Congratulate.
Salt Lake City where they're shooting to set everything up, but I won't believe
Nice.
I'm on set.
Oh, you're going to be on set for this film?
Well, I plan on being there, yeah, as long as it happens.
Excellent.
I've had a lot of things fall apart at the last second.
I know it's a challenge with Hollywood, isn't it? Because it always seems like it's a moving target. Things look great. They'll buy the rights for something, and then you work really hard on it, and something else comes along, and they shift focus.
Sometimes it's COVID. COVID came along, and I had 2 movies about to shoot, and they were both shut down. And this movie that's shooting in July is a survivor of that. But yeah, I mean, it's crazy how the networks buy stuff, right? So an NBC, for instance, they might buy 30 different pilots for a season, and so they hire 30 different writers or writing teams to write these episodes. Then out of those 30, they decide, oh, these 16 or these 12, we'll shoot those. And so they shoot 12 different pilots, which each might cost $2 to $4 million. But out of those 12 or 10 that they shoot, they only actually air 6 of them on the, so they've shot all they've spent, all those millions of dollars on stuff they're expecting to discard. So it's just a crazy business in that way. And you
It
can
is.
actually make a great living as a screenwriter and never see anything get made.
Yeah, I'm sure. And I think that's frustrating on one hand. We had a young adult writer who came to do a program, and she was one of the head writers for Arrow. And she got her start writing. She was a gopher, and she said, those first 2 years to get her foot in the door to be a screenwriter were 2 of the hardest years of her life because of, where they start some of these screenwriters out when they're first out of college, basically being the gophers and paying their dues to get to writing. So it was really interesting to kind of get that insight on how Hollywood and that group works. Do you enjoy being doing so many different projects? Because I would assume it's exhausting.
It is exhausting at times. It's also invigorating. One of the things that I appreciate about writing for Hollywood or writing for comics is that writing novels, by contrast, is hermetic and marathonic. I'm alone in my dungeon playing with my imaginary friends for months or years on end, and that can get kind of lonely. And when you're making comics, I am on the phone daily with the artists I work with. I'm working with this guy named Brent Schoonover. I'm working with this other artist named Joshua Cassara. I'm working with this other artist named Adam Kubert, the legendary Adam Kubert. And, we're trading texts, we're trading phone calls, we're trading emails, we're strenuously trying to tell the best story possible. And that doesn't even include the colorist, the letterer, the editorial team. As part of the XMen right now, I am on a Slack. It's actually open at the top of my screen, and I can see it going bing, 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 because the XMen group's on there all day and talking about ideas and trying to not just tell our individual series, because I write Wolverine, I write X-Force, but there's the X-Men, then there's Excalibur, there's X-Factor, there's New Mutants. There's a lot of different X books. And we're trying to tell our individual stories, but also trying to tell a larger story. So it's sort of like a continuous writer's room as we operate together. And then when you work with Hollywood, right, you've got your director, maybe a co-writer, maybe a writer's room. You've got the producers. Everybody it's very much a team effort. And to have all of those different opportunities to write a novel, it's just me. And I like that. I like it being just me because it's my thing. It's my world. I make
Cool.
all the shots. But with these other situations, I recognize how all of these other people can not always, I have to say that, but they can, in the best possible opportunity, make you so much better. I've had producers, in other words, who sometimes are like, what if there's a Jedi in it? And you're like, what? I'm being a little bombastic when I say that, but sometimes you get the notes and you're like, huh, okay, I'll do my best with that. Sometimes though, you get the notes and you're like, you are smart.
Hmm. Technically, though, you could do a crossover now. I mean, technically, it could happen. We could see Wolverine and Jar Jar Binks together finally at last. I think that combination duo, that everybody's been
Well, if it's
hoping for
Jar Jar,
over all these years.
what Wolverine's going to do with his claws?
So,
Flash him out of existence.
so Ben, before when you were in college and starting all this, did you think that this was what you were going to be doing? That were you thinking that you're just going to be a novelist, or did you sort of have that bigger picture already established?
Uh, you know, it's a tricky sort of thing becoming a writer. You face a lot of rejection, a lot of
Mhm.
doubt. I was told, very early on, you have a better chance of making it as a Major League Baseball player than you do a writer. There's every step of the way, somebody's trying to, edge you out or
Yeah.
tell you it's not possible. Um, Thankfully, I have a certain level of doggedness to me where, despite the fact that I've heard no thousands of times and continue to hear no on a regular basis, despite the fact that I wrote 4 failed novels before publishing one, uh,
Okay.
despite the fact that I was having to teach and sometimes teach a huge number of students, a huge number of courses to pay the bills, and then write, at night and everything else. I've managed to go the distance. It hasn't always been easy, but that has made me really value and appreciate where I am right now. And I've also had a great support system from the very beginning in my then girlfriend, now wife, who, is early on one of the people who said, after I wrote her some really lousy love poems, said, you should be a writer. And okay. Um, you she's stuck with me through all of that. Even when she read some of those earlier stories and she was like, huh, not as good as I thought you were.
Yeah. Well, but that's the thing. Everybody says, when you start writing, you're going to write a few clunkers before you actually,
You
you
have to
know,
put in, as Malcolm Gladwell says, you have to put in those 10,000 hours, right? Whether you're a pianist or a ball player, right? Or a painter, you set up your easel in the museum and you try to paint like Van Gogh one day and like Matisse the next. You sit down at the piano and you try to play Mozart and Gershwin. You play your scales over and over and over again. You stand at the free throw line and you toss up, the ball over and over and over. And in the same way, as a writer, those 10,000 hours, right, which might amount to many manuscripts. Every novelist I know has failed books in the drawer.
mhm.
Have to do that to get to the place where you're approaching the edge of mastery.
Absolutely. I always cringe when the authors have since long passed and they pull out some of those manuscripts that, never saw the light of day while they were alive. And I'm like, there's a reason. There's a reason why you didn't see that one.
Earn them.
Exactly. So Ben, it sounds like we've talked a lot about what's happening in the future. So after this first trilogy that you're going to be doing, are we going to see more books in this
I've got
universe?
many more mapped out. I'm ready to hammer.
That's exciting right there. Um, I am curious on one thing. When you talk about research, how many hours of research do you think you put in before you write a book?
I spend a long time thinking about a novel before I start to write it. Sometimes 2 years, sometimes 3 years.
Mhm.
And part of that is research, is talking to firsthand sources, reading articles, watching documentaries, reading nonfiction books on the subject.
Mhm.
But it's also just deliberately thinking about immersing myself in these characters. And I have usually scrolls up on my office wall, big scrolls of paper. And on the left-hand side of the scroll, I have the characters and sort of biographies, Wikipedia entries, I guess you could say, on each of them. And sometimes I draw them as well, and I'm trying to figure out who they are. And it really begins not just with that, high concept idea like post-apocalyptic Lewis and Clark or alien metal or whatever, but it begins with the characters. Because once I figure out who they are, I figure out what they want, I'm able to put obstacles in the way of that desire, like a cruel God. And that's when you have the first stirrings of plot. And I do this, I create these larger narrative sheets. They look almost orchestral in the way that I lay them out, because I sometimes have like check marks above something that's a set piece moment, or a downturn in something that's more of an emotive respite. So they look like orchestral music, but it's not just that. It's, I probably don't need to do that. I mean, a part of me thinks I could just instinctually move forward with an idea.
Mhm.
Uh, but it's almost like Dumbo with his magic feather. Because the
Yeah,
first novel I published, I did an outline. I hadn't done it with the others. And so I kind of feel like ever since then, I need to hold on to the magic feather to fly. Um,
yeah,
it's like, I don't know. I have to do outlines for all my comics. It's required. The company won't approve a comic without an outline. You have corporate oversight. So I'm just so used to it at this point, and a studio won't hire you to write a movie or a TV show unless you have an outline. So it's like warming up. It's like stretching before a run or something. It just makes it that much easier.
absolutely. And it doesn't say that the outline is set in stone. If
No.
you've outlined it and the characters say no, really we need to go here rather than here, you're going to change it so that it makes a lot of sense. Um, it sounds like also you're used to the fact that writing a published book, writing a comic book, writing a script, it's all very much it takes a village, to finish a final product. And you're the main writer for the Ninth Metal, but you've had a team of people, fortunately, that have helped guide you, and said, "Hey, this works, this doesn't," or make these spelling changes, things like that, as simple as that. Um,
I mean, a good copywriter, especially, is worth their weight in gold. I mean, the whole editorial team and the marketing team and even the researchers, like it's all of them are invaluable. But I found that copywriters save your ass the most.
oh yeah. It
All
really
the
does. I mean, that comma could really make a huge difference.
I actually have a copy editor who I worked with previously on the darknet, and I was like, I need to work with this person again because she is so smart, and she also is a doctor, and she just does copy editing for fun in her spare time. So anything is connected to medical stuff, she's like, yeah, no, you got that totally wrong. This is the way it works, and so
That's so cool. And you've set up those relationships over the years, which is awesome, which is so awesome. I'm excited, Ben, for to see what's coming out, what we're gonna see your name on next. Um, and I've got to say, as a fan, thank you so much for writing these books, because I am always entertained and I'm always excited when I see something new with your name on it.
thank you so much, and I really appreciate you helping get the word out and helping curate, be ambassador for these sci-fi book clubs. And the Poison Pen is such a crown jewel among indie bookstores. It
We
means a lot to do an event with you.
we try, but we wouldn't be here without wonderful customers and wonderful writers like yourselves. I mean, I think it's just a neat community that we've sort of helped all build together. And so that's part of the exciting thing about working here. I've been here close to 20 years, probably a little over. And I've enjoyed every moment of it. It's just such a passion. And it's really wonderful to talk to people about books, and then talk to writers about their books, so we can kind of share it with everybody else. So um, it looks like we're a little light on questions tonight, Ben. So I'll go ahead. I just want to say thank you again, and I hope we get a chat on book 2.
Definitely, I'll be here. Hopefully in
Right
person.
on. What's that?
Hopefully in person next time.
That would be great, and not during a time where it's 118. So we don't like to see our authors melt.
I'll just be a puddle of flannel and beard on the floor.
That's okay. We'll put the mic up to you. You'll be fine. Take care of yourself, and we'll see you next book.
Right. Happy Friday, everybody.
Happy Friday. Thanks, Ben.